They laughed at dinner when my daughter-in-law compared my small house to my son's penthouse. The laugh wasn't loud, just confident, like everyone already agreed on what the comparison meant. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I own the building he lives in. He has been renting that penthouse from me for years. My name is Marrow Ellison. I am 58. I have lived in the same house on the north side for a long time. It is modest, clean, and paid for. I chose it because it fit the life I wanted, not the one people like to show off. That choice has followed me into every room I enter, especially rooms with family. The dinner invitation came from my son earlier that week. Nothing special. Just a table, familiar faces, and the usual rhythm. I said yes without thinking much about it. I rarely do. Showing up has always been easier than explaining myself. My daughter-in-law arrived smiling, already talking about schedules and upgrades. She has a way of turning conversation into a display. My son listened, nodding, letting her words do the work for him. When someone mentioned where I lived, the tone shifted slightly. Not cruel, not yet, just enough to mark the difference. I felt the old instinct to stay quiet settle in. I took a sip of water and let the moment pass. The penthouse came up soon after, like it always does, casually, admired, untouched by questions. I stayed still, listening, knowing how quickly admiration can sharpen into something else. The comparison had been made. The next move would not be mine. The waiter had just finished setting the plates when my daughter-in-law leaned back in her chair and smiled in my direction. "So," she said lightly, "you're still in that little house, right?" The word little landed cleanly, polite, measured. I nodded once. "I am?" She laughed, soft and bright. "It's kind of charming, I guess, especially when you compare it to where he lives now." My son didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He shifted in his seat, comfortable, letting the moment stretch. "Honestly," she went on, turning to the others, "the penthouse feels like a different world. Floor-to-ceiling windows, private elevator. The view alone is unreal." Someone at the table chuckled. Another voice followed. The sound spread easily, like permission had been given. I kept my hands folded. I felt the familiar pressure behind my ribs, the one that comes when a joke isn't really a joke. "Well," I said calmly, "it suits him." She tilted her head. "It really does. Some people just aim higher." The words were wrapped in sugar, but they cut all the same. My son smiled into his glass. "It's just a place," he said, not correcting her, not clarifying anything. "That's not true," she replied quickly. "It says a lot about where you're going." Her eyes flicked back to me, just long enough. My silence was noticed now. I could feel it shift the room, the way quiet always does when it refuses to disappear. I took a sip of water and set the glass down slowly. Around us, the conversation moved on, but the comparison stayed where it had been placed. Solid and intentional. That was when I understood. This wasn't careless humor. This was positioning. She was drawing a line, and she expected me to stay on the smaller side of it. I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't have words, but because I recognized the moment for what it was. She had smiled to make it acceptable. They had laughed to make it final. I let it stand. The way the table laughed felt familiar. Not because it was kind, but because it followed a pattern I learned early. When my son was a child, people used to say, "He's going places." They said it like a promise. When they spoke about me, the tone was different. "Marrow's so easy." My mother would tell friends. She never asks for much. I learned quickly what that meant. At family gatherings, my son talked and people leaned in. If he interrupted, it was confidence. If I did, it was impatience. "Let him finish." Someone would say when I spoke, "You're so sensitive." Another would add if I pushed back. Silence. On the other hand, earned approval. You're so mature. My father once said when I stayed quiet during an argument that had nothing to do with me, that praise stayed with me longer than it should have. Over time, being low maintenance became my role. I was the one who adjusted, who smoothed things over, who made room. When my son took risks, it was ambition. When I chose stability, it was expected. At one dinner years ago, I tried to explain why I had turned down a job that would have required constant travel. You always play it safe, my mother said, smiling like it was advice. I play it steady, I replied. My son laughed. That's basically the same thing. No one corrected him. Even now, across the table from him and his wife, I felt that old training settle into my bones. Say less. Smile gently. Let the moment pass. The habit was strong, shaped by years of being rewarded for disappearing just enough to keep the peace. When my daughter-in-law compared my house to the penthouse, she stepped into a story that had been written long before she arrived. She didn't invent the imbalance. She recognized it and used it. My son knew this dynamic too. He sat comfortably inside it, saying nothing, benefiting from the silence that had always worked in his favor. I understood then why the laughter stung the way it did. It wasn't about the house. It was about the role they expected me to keep playing, and I had been playing it well for a very long time. I didn't start in real estate because I wanted to be impressive. I started because I understood numbers. And numbers never cared who was watching. Early on, a man I worked with told me, "You should take bigger swings. That's how people notice you." I'm not trying to be noticed. I said, I'm trying to be right. Chicago taught me patience. The older buildings here don't reward hurry. They reward maintenance, timing, and knowing when to wait. I learned to buy what made sense, hold what paid steadily, and walk away from anything that required applause to survive. I kept my work quiet. No social posts, no stories told at family dinners. When someone asked what I did, I said, I invest, and let the conversation move on. That suited me. Once, my son glanced at my files spread across the table and said, "You still doing that landlord stuff? I'm managing assets," I replied. He shrugged. "Seems slow." "It is," I said. That's the point. I chose buildings with history, not shine. Roofs that needed care, tenants who paid on time, returns that showed up year after year instead of all at once. When a deal worked, no one clapped. When it didn't, no one noticed either. That kind of work trains you not to confuse noise with value. At dinner, listening to my daughter-in-law talk about the penthouse like it was proof of arrival, I thought about the difference between owning something and performing it, about how often people confuse the image of success with the work that holds it up. My son smiled when she spoke, enjoying how easily admiration followed him. I recognized the look. I had seen it in boardrooms. In meetings where confidence mattered more than accuracy, I said nothing, not because I had nothing to contribute, but because my life had taught me that substance rarely interrupts a performance, and I had learned to wait until the performance needed the truth to keep going. The penthouse had become a character in our family long before anyone asked to see it. "We live so high up," my daughter-in-law said once, leaning forward as if height itself carried authority. "You forget what the street sounds like." My son nodded. "Parking's a nightmare where we are." Neither of them ever said the word own. They didn't need to. Everyone filled it in for them. My sister-in-law asked, "So, is it everything you hoped for?" "It fits us," my daughter-in-law said without hesitation. "Some places just match your energy." I watched the way she spoke. How easily she folded the penthouse into her identity. It wasn't a home. It was evidence. My son lifted his glass. "It's just a place." "That's not true," she replied. touching his arm. It shows how far you've come. The table agreed. Quietly. Enthusiastically. No one asked about numbers or timing or how long they planned to stay. They admired the view they had never seen. I noticed other things. When maintenance came up, my son said, "They're pretty strict in our building." When someone asked about renovations, he said, "You have to run everything through management." Always they, never we. A cousin mentioned buying. "You must be thinking about it." Right. My son smiled. Eventually, my daughter-in-law laughed. "Why rush? We're exactly where we should be." She said it like a conclusion. Later, she turned to me. "You should come visit sometime. It's very different from your place." "I'm sure it is." I said. The contrast hung there. Deliberate now. My small house, their penthouse. Her tone suggested progress. Evolution. A ladder I had chosen not to climb. My son didn't interrupt. He let her frame the story because it benefited him. He had learned, as I had, when to speak and when to let the room do the work. As the evening went on, the penthouse returned again and again, in jokes, in asides, in admiration passed casually across the table. It was treated like a shared accomplishment, something that confirmed long-held beliefs about ambition and outcome. I listened carefully, not with envy, with attention. Illusions leave traces, small inconsistencies. Words chosen too carefully. Confidence that relies on repetition. Everyone else believed the story because it made sense to them. It fit the roles they already understood. I held my glass and let the conversation flow, aware of how firmly they defended an image that gave them something to admire, and how fragile that image would be if anyone bothered to look underneath. I didn't learn the truth in a dramatic way. There was no confession. No moment where my son sat across from me and admitted anything. I learned it the same way I learn most things through paperwork. The building came to me years ago, part of a quiet acquisition that made sense on paper and in practice. Solid structure, reliable tenants, a long-term hold. When the management company called to say a new tenant wanted the top unit, I approved it without much thought. It wasn't until months later that I recognized his name on a report. I called the property manager. "That's my son," I said. There was a pause. "He's been a good tenant," the manager replied carefully. "Mostly on time." Mostly. I didn't confront him. I didn't ask why he hadn't told me. I didn't correct the story he let everyone believe. I watched the numbers instead. Rent schedules, notices, small delays that became patterns. Once, during a visit, I said quietly, "How's the place treating you?" He smiled. "It's great. Busy building." I nodded. "Management keeping up?" "Yeah," he said. "They're strict." They were, because I asked them to be. There were months when payments slipped. Nothing dramatic, a few days late, then longer. Each time. I signed off on notices like any other owner would. No favors, no punishments, just consistency. I stayed silent not because I was afraid of conflict, but because I understood what silence could hold. I was protecting him from embarrassment, from responsibility, from the truth he wasn't ready to carry. At least that's what I told myself. Over time, the weight shifted. It wasn't just his secret anymore. It was mine. I carried it into every dinner. Every conversation where the penthouse was praised like proof of something earned. I listened. I waited. I tracked every detail. And slowly, I realized that what I was protecting wasn't him at all. It was the illusion that kept everyone comfortable, including me. After that dinner, my son called me twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. When I finally listened, his voice sounded casual. "Everything okay?" he asked. "You were quiet last night." "I'm fine." I said when I called back. "I'm always quiet." He laughed. You know what I mean. I did. And I didn't correct him. I thought about telling him then, about saying, you should start being honest, about asking why he let his wife speak to me the way she did. The words lined up easily in my head. They always do when no one is listening. But I knew how that conversation would end. He would say he didn't mean anything by it. He would say she was just joking. He would say I was taking it personally. The truth would get buried under explanations before it ever had a chance to stand. I didn't want to reveal anything in anger. I didn't want the truth to sound like a weapon. Even if it could be used that way, I wanted it to land clean, without apology, without emotion doing the work for it. Still, doubt crept in. I imagined holidays changing shape, phone calls growing shorter, being labeled difficult instead of quiet. I had spent years keeping things smooth. I knew exactly what it would cost to stop. One afternoon, my daughter-in-law texted me a photo, a skyline shot from the penthouse, sent without context. I replied, "Nice view." She wrote back, "It's good to live where you belong." I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. That was the moment something settled. Not anger, clarity. They weren't just enjoying the illusion. They were using it, measuring themselves against it, measuring me against it. And they were doing it openly now, confident I would continue to stay in my place. I decided then that I wouldn't interrupt the performance. I would let it continue until it reached a point where it couldn't move forward without the truth. I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't explain myself in advance. I would wait for the moment they chose to make the comparison public again. When that happened, I would simply stop carrying what wasn't mine to hold anymore. And when the truth surfaced, it would do so because they had forced the space for it, not because I had demanded to be heard. The second dinner was louder than the first, more confident, like the comparison had already been rehearsed. My daughter-in-law didn't ease into it this time. She waited until everyone had settled, until the attention was comfortably hers. "You know," she said, smiling toward me, "I was thinking about your house again. It's cozy, very different from what he's used to now." Someone laughed immediately. My sister-in-law lifted her eyebrows. My son leaned back, arms crossed, already relaxed. "It's not just space." My daughter-in-law continued, "It's mindset. Some people want more." My son smiled into his glass. "It's just a place." She shook her head. "No. It says everything." The laughter came again, fuller this time, warmer, final. I felt it then. Not anger, readiness. I set my fork down, took a breath, not to steady myself, but to mark the moment. "The penthouse," I said. The table quieted just enough. My son looked at me, surprised. "What about it?" "I own it," I said calmly. There was a pause. A small one. The kind that waits for a punchline. My daughter-in-law laughed once. "Okay." I didn't smile. "He's been renting it from me for years," I added. "Through the management company." Silence replaced the laughter like someone had turned off a switch. My son's smile disappeared first. "That's not funny," he said. "It's not a joke," I replied. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table. Screen already open. Payment history, dates, notices. I didn't push it toward anyone. I didn't need to. My daughter-in-law stared at the screen, then at me. Her face went still, like she was recalculating something that no longer added up. "You never told me this," my son said quietly. "You never asked," I said. My sister-in-law cleared her throat. No one looked at her. "This is humiliating," my daughter-in-law said, her voice tight. "Why would you say this?" Here I met her eyes. "Because you said everything else here." My son opened his mouth, then closed it. The room felt smaller, not because of space, but because the story everyone believed had nowhere left to stand. No one laughed, No one defended him. No one reached for their glass. The truth sat between us, steady and unraised, doing exactly what I had waited for it to do. The silence didn't end the conversation. It changed it. My daughter-in-law was the first to move. She folded her napkin carefully, as if order might restore something. This didn't need to happen like this. She said, "Family things should stay private." I nodded once. They usually do. My son finally looked at me. His voice was low. "You could have told me." "I could have," I said. "You didn't give me a reason to." He rubbed his face, the way he does when he feels exposed. "You made me look foolish." I kept my tone even. I let the story finish. "That's not fair," he said. "No," I agreed. "It's accurate." My daughter-in-law pushed her chair back slightly. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said. "It's just a rental." "It is." I said, "And rentals come with terms." She frowned. "Are you threatening us?" "I'm being clear," I replied. The table watched now. No one interrupted. No one rushed to soften the moment. "You're behind," I said to my son, not dramatically, but consistently. "I've let it slide because you're my son." "That stops tonight." His face flushed. "So what? You're going to kick us out. I'm giving you 30 days, I said. "To catch up or make other arrangements." My daughter-in-law shook her head. "This feels punitive." "It's standard," I said. "I expect the same from every tenant." My son swallowed. "You didn't have to do this." "I did," I said, "because I won't be spoken to like I'm small while carrying something this large." No one raised their voice. No one cried. That surprised them. The power shifted not with force, but with structure, with clarity. The server arrived with the check and hesitated, sensing something wrong. No one reached for it. The evening had ended without ceremony. As we stood to leave, my daughter-in-law avoided my eyes. My son lagged behind. His shoulders no longer relaxed. Outside, the night felt ordinary again. The world hadn't changed. Only the story we'd been telling about ourselves had, and that story was no longer mine to support. My son moved out 3 weeks later. He didn't announce it. He didn't argue anymore either. He called once to say, "I've found another place." His voice was flatter than I remembered. "That's good," I said. "Let the manager know the date." He paused. "Are we—" "Okay," I chose my words carefully. "We're different." He didn't respond right away. Then he said, "I didn't think it would end like this." "Neither did I replied, but it needed to end honestly. After that, communication thinned. Holidays became tentative. Conversations stayed on safe ground. My daughter-in-law stopped messaging altogether. When we crossed paths, she was polite in the way people are when they don't want to be known anymore. The building stayed full. The unit was cleaned. The numbers closed cleanly. I treated it the way I treat everything else. No drama, no exceptions. What surprised me wasn't the quiet. It was the relief. One evening, I came home to my small house and set my keys down in the same bowl I've used for years. The place hadn't changed. The walls still held the same light. The furniture still fit the way it always had. I sat at the table and thought about what I'd learned. There are people who mistake volume for power and visibility for worth. I used to let that confusion shape how small I made myself. I don't anymore. Owning something doesn't require announcing it. And respect doesn't come from silence that erases you. If there's a lesson in all this, it's a simple one. You can love people and still stop carrying their illusions. You can be calm without being compliant. And you can choose truth, even when it costs you comfort. I locked the door that night and stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet I'd earned. If this story resonated with you, take a second to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, or subscribe to the channel. You never know who needs to hear that it's okay to take up space in your own life.